on out there, world? It's your boy Tommy on the spot for Watch Along Wrestling. Hopefully everyone is doing well and staying safe here as we enter the dog days of summer. Today I am joined, as usual, by my main man, Steve, down in Orlando, Florida. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. As this is pre-recorded, we are recording this on the eve of Forbidden Door.
Right.
So I am pretty hyped for that.
Yes, it should be a very good show. And yes, we are pre-recording this, and then we're going to be dropping it as we get a little closer to Summerslam as part of our Summerslam content here on Watch Along Wrestling. Today we are going to be jumping into the Wayback Machine and traveling back 15 years to a show that Steve and I were at live, and I want to say perhaps our only live WWE pay-per-view, WWE proper pay-per-view together, SummerSlam 2007. Does that sound about right, Steve? Now, granted, we've been to shows together, but the only show that we went together, SummerSlam 2007, as a pay-per-view.
Did we not go to a Great American Bash together?
Oh, we might have. That is true. We did.
I think we went to the one, like the horrible one.
I think we did. We've been, yeah. I think it was Bash 09, which was not a good show. I think that one was at the Nassau Coliseum.
Yeah.
And then that led to SummerSlam 09, which was the following month. And I think after that, Steve was like, I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel. I am finished. I will not be watching wrestling again. And then slowly but surely, he's caught the bug again. And we did go to NXT TakeOver 25, which you can look in the archives and check out our blog from that show just a couple of years ago. But 2007, the summer. Steve, where are you at this point in your life, and what do you remember when you start hearing about the summer of 2007?
Summer of 2007, I was in college. It was, my sophomore going into junior year, I guess, of college, second into third year of college. Aside from that, not too much.
Yeah, for me, this is now junior going into senior year. Does that sound about right? I guess so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, junior going into senior year. So I'm 20 years old, a little wet behind the ears. I remember I remember the first real relationship I had ending that summer. It was the 3-year relationship. And so the idea that you just immediately think this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, that first person that you consider that young love with. And I thought that and I would live happily ever after, and you never, ever experience any sort of heartbreak. So I do, right as the beginning of this summer in 2007. But in doing so, I do remember it actually ended up being a lot of fun because what ended up happening was I think we were going through this and going back into the Wayback Machine and starting to go over some notes. But this summer we ended up getting a Yankees ticket pack. It was like a season tickets, but it was only like a 6-pack of games or an 8-pack of games specifically for the summer that we went to. I think it was the two of us and 2 other friends, and we made it a point to go to all of these games. And it was like, I want to say it was like 6 games for $30. Like, it was an insane deal. And we went, and taking the trek from where we were in Queens to where the Yankees are in the Bronx is not easy, especially if you're taking public transportation, which we did most of the time. You have to go from like 3 different subways, but it ended up being a lot of fun during that summer.
Yeah, I remember taking like 2 hours ish, if not
each
more.
Way.
Yeah, each way. But yeah, no, and especially considering how that was also, I believe, one of the summers where we would also routinely go to Met games.
Yes, we went to a lot of Met games. We got in for free because we had a friend who had a hookup and would get us like seasons tickets, and he had season tickets like right on the field. They were unbelievable seats. And then we went to a ton of concerts, Warped Tour, Ozfest. We're going to talk a little more about those as we get towards SummerSlam 2007. Where are you as a fan of WWE and I guess of wrestling at this stage of your life, if you could remember that far back?
If I remember this, I feel like we probably went to more of like indie shows when we were like in high school still, right?
Correct. I started going to more Ring of Honor. Yeah, definitely more indie shows like high schoolish, like 2003, 2004. Every time there's an indie in town, we're going.
This was more of like tail end of that, at least. but also still following this along. I didn't follow it as religiously as I did in high school.
Yeah.
And I remember that, and a couple of like as I'm watching this, a couple of things like kicked into my mind that like as we kind of go through the card, I'll explain. But yeah, like I wasn't a super fan. I hadn't stopped completely, but I was definitely kind of it was on the tail end.
Yeah, and I remember 2006. I feel like we watched a whole shit ton of wrestling because I remember that month at the end of 2006 where there was the 4 straight weeks of pay-per-views and we ordered them all.
Yeah, I
It was
remember.
like Survivor Series. The next week was December to Dismember. The next week was Angle and Samoa Joe TNA show we ordered, and each one of these was like $50. And then it was Armageddon 2006. Because for me at the time, I had really in the middle of 2006 ish, maybe 2005, between 2005 2006, I started becoming very close with my friend Matt and his girlfriend at the time. Now I believe his wife. I'm not 100% sure. We unfortunately lost a little contact, but I become good friends with them, and they are obsessed with wrestling. And so this kind of reinvigorates my wrestling love for wrestling. And we go to everything. Like if there's anything remotely close, we're going to every single show. SmackDowns, traveling to Baltimore for an Extreme Rules, like ridiculous amounts of wrestling. We're going to every Ring of Honor show. If it's in the tri-state area, we went there. Out in the blizzard in the middle of Long Island, to watch Kevin Steen, who we referred to at the time as Kevin Steve because he looked a little bit like a young version of you, who's now Kevin Owens in WWE. And he went through and won an entire tournament, and I remember that vividly. We ordered every single pay-per-view. If there was a press conference, we'd ditch work and we'd go to the press conference. And this is like right at the time, too, where I started in my life becoming actually having a job, like a real kind of
Yeah,
grown-up-y type job, not like a super big job, but like a job where, I was working with individuals on the autism spectrum. I mention that because it does play into a little bit about what we're going to talk about here down the road here. But when that occurs, I'm working there, I'm doing that, and yet I leave those jobs. Like I had no problem if it was like I remember the McMahon $millions giveaway. I remember when Vince McMahon was giving away money
hmm
to get people to watch Raw. It's all about the money. He's doing that shit. I left work and they were online all day from like 6 a.m. to make sure we got into that press conference. And we do it. I'd leave college and go. You and I would leave. I went to Hofstra University, so Nassau Coliseum was right there. So if they ever had a show, I would go in the middle of the day and go down there and get tickets for us to go to those shows. So my fandom going into 2007, I think was actually quite large. It was almost like even though I didn't love the product, I was so involved with so many things wrestling that
yeah,
I remember really being a huge fan. Every Monday night, myself and Matt and his girlfriend would go to Moe's in Hempstead. I'd leave school. They'd meet me out at Moe's. We'd go Monday night to Moe's for like years. We did this. And then we'd go back home and make sure we watched Raw in its entirety because we'd have the DVR recording it. So that was like every single Monday for a very long period of time. And it was a fun time. And I think so. Even though again, I wasn't a huge John Cena fan, I could definitely tell a lot of like my favorites weren't really involved anymore. But I think that I was starting to really love Ring of Honor, and I started to really, I was enjoying being a fan of pro wrestling for sure.
yeah, and I think that that's probably why this is probably more of like the tail end for me because Ring of Honor and TNA for some reason for me it wasn't as accessible. I don't know if it was just because of the fact that like I didn't watch it or I didn't know how to watch it or I just didn't feel like jumping into it. Like when I would jump in and I would say like, oh yeah, TNA is on. Let me check out TNA. Completely not understand anything that was going on, and I was like, I have no interest. Like I have no actual investment in any of this that's going on. So let me go
Yeah,
back to what I know, which was at the time WWE, which was not the best product for me during that time.
yeah, no, it was very heavy on John Cena.
Yeah. Which
If you didn't like him, and he is because I went back and I watched a lot of this stuff. He comes out and he went from like being the kind of doctor of thugonomics to like this sort of super cheesy. I'm aware I'm being cheesy. Don't you think I'm so funny because I'm so cheesy type of guy? For example, when Vince McMahon dies, which we'll get in here to a second, he doesn't really die, obviously. But when they do that angle, they're doing a whodunit the next week on Raw. And Cena comes out and he's acting all serious and he's, who done it? Was it this guy? Was it that guy? Was it you, the drunk guy up in the stands? That's right, you drunk guy. I'm keeping my eye on you, and I think you might have been the one to do it. And it's just like everybody else in the ring is just looking at this guy like you're a fool. And he is the champion for a long time for WWE.
And also, again, added a lot to why I had stopped watching wrestling in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, it was a different time. I will circle back just to quickly mention, because as we're recording this, it just broke about a little while ago that former WWE referee Tim White passed away. So I will quickly just mention, because you and I used to really love, I don't know if we loved it or it was just something we always watched, but the vignettes about Tim White, the really random, strange deals where all of a sudden, and I want to say 2004, 2005, Tim White had been retired for a while because he got hurt in the Hell in a Cell match with Jericho and Triple H. So they ended up doing a deal where Tim White got hit from the ring apron and he had hurt his arm. So now he became depressed. And they kept showing these vignettes where Josh Matthews would talk with Tim White every single week. And this went on for months and months and months and months. And Tim White tried to kill himself every single episode of these little vignettes. And they were so silly and so over the top and so weirdly WWE, like, why is WWE doing this? But in a car crashy way, we watched them every week.
I think it was mostly because we were, late teen, early 20s.
Yeah.
And I hate to use it was a different time cop out.
Yeah, but it
kind of was. And it was also, I think, one of those things where, because it was like a every single week thing, and it was very much done up for the camp and for the over the topness.
Yeah.
And nobody took it seriously. And I think that it was kind of part of that like morbid humor that young men gravitate towards.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it was very silly. And at the end of every one of the episodes, Josh Matthews would let out a big, Mr. White, that's not wise. Mr. White, that's not wise. And he'd like throw himself in a wood chipper. And the next week he'd be there all bandaged up and somehow didn't die.
Right. And drink rat poison or something like that, like crazy, like.
Yeah. And so during this time period, I want to say 2006, 2007, I was walking over from Hofstra getting us tickets for a Nassau Coliseum show. And at the time, WWE used to always, when they'd go to Nassau Coliseum, they'd stay at the Marriott Marquis across the street. And that particular event, William Regal, Dave Taylor, who was there very briefly in WWE, and a very young, I think, Drew McIntyre, were walking across with Tim White. And I was on the phone with you trying to get tickets, and I let out the most mark-outish, the most despicable, hold on, Steve, you got to hang on. Give me a second. I let out a big, Mr. White, that's not wise. And Tim White kind of just shook his head and smiled and gave me a nice wave. And years later, I told him that story because all of a sudden we started going all these signings back in just a couple of years ago, 2017, 18, meeting Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns, and every one of those signings, you'd end the signing and Tim White would be standing right there on the side. So I'd talk to him at all of these signings and say, what are you doing here? And he'd say, oh, he's traveling around. He was still, at this point, he was still working for the company, traveling, driving talent around, and just one of the sweetest people I think you'll ever find, and definitely wish that it's nice that WWE paid acknowledgement to him, and that so many people went out of their way to acknowledge him online, whether they worked with WWE, AEW, if they worked with Tim White, they went out of their way to say such nice things, which was nice to see.
Yeah, and I mean, everything that I've heard is that he was a genuinely great person, and I think that the fact that WWE actually the video package that they sent out was so actually heartfelt, and you can tell.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially I remember they, it was clear this guy was also just a guy who would do whatever it took to be a part of the show. Like, just loved it so much. That's why he did these silly vignettes. That's why he was just driving around the talent, doing all these things. And so, I mean, I remember he owned a bar called the Friendly Tap, I think it was. and they used it almost every show for all those APA backstage brawls. They actually went to his bar and destroyed it, and he had no problem, just because at the end of the day, he was doing it for the betterment of the show. So rest in peace, Tim White. Didn't want to let our show go through without saying anything about him, and certainly when we were talking about all the shows we've went to, it reminded me about him. But I guess as we now can start this journey, I think it's important to start to give you guys an idea of what was going on in WWE in the summer of 2007, because I do think that SummerSlam, and really a few days after SummerSlam, is really the culmination to really set the picture of what this was for WWE. And so what I'll probably do is separate out a lot of these videos here, bring you the full show at the end of the week or month, but separate out a couple of small clips for you guys to see, because I think it's important to start June 11th, 2007, to begin even before the summer starts. This is the Raw Vince McMahon Appreciation Night, and ends with the Vince McMahon getting in his limo, closing the limousine door, and it blowing to smithereens, and his presumed death in WWE storyline. Steve, do you remember this, and what were your thoughts as it went down?
I do remember it. I remember that it happened, and I remember the end of it being very weird. Where where all of the superstars were lined up in the back, and Vince just kind of like shuffles down the line and just kind of acknowledges everybody, and it's very weird.
Yeah.
And then he just solemn. Yeah, very in a weird solemn, but at the same time, it definitely felt like a lot of the superstars that were there didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing.
Right. Well, it looked like they were just like, hey, everyone, stand there.
Yeah.
And don't do anything as Vince McMahon comes by. And of course, the famous one is as he walks by. And it's none of the big stars. It's all of these random, if you go back and watch that clip, half the people I didn't even recognize. I think there's a very young Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins in there. It is a strange mishmash of talent. And he walks by Paul London, and he's up against the wall, and that was one of these things where it got it was smart on his part, because he was always one of the people were going back to as maybe he's the one who did it, because why else would he be having such a silly smile on his face? And of course, Paul London at the time is kind of a mid-cardy tag team with Brian Kendrick, but it was solemn, it was strange, and I remember once he gets in the limo and it blows up, being a little spooked, because it was what the hell was that?
Yeah. It had it was a very weird tone, and but it also at the same time fit in with a lot of the awkward, only Vince thinks this is funny, but everybody has to do it anyway type of segments that were just all over the place.
Yeah, and you could totally even see him pitching into, no, I'm gonna kill myself here on TV, and everyone's just got to deal with it. And it was weird. And I remember, I'm somebody who gets very much, I'm very superstitious. I don't like to throw things out there into the universe. And I remember thinking, one of the first things I thought was you don't want to do a fake death like this, because at the time in wrestling, we're still mid-2000s. People are dying. People are, you're having a lot of drug overdoses. There's still a lot of cleanup that's going on from the Eddie Guerrero. The Eddie Guerrero passes away. They instituted the wellness policy, but no one really knows how legitimate it is. There's still a lot of old timers who are passing away way young. So I was doing something like this and having this big angle for the summer. And I'm always a big fan of the WWE summer angles, but it really kind of lends itself to something going awry here. And so I was a little nervous that something would come up. And the weirdest part about it was, I remember it was on WWE.com, and it said, Vince McMahon's limo blows up, presumed dead. And this was the headline on there.
Yeah.
And I remember the next day they put down the flags at half mast at WWE headquarters to sell that he had passed away. And I remember there were actually news. I vividly remember there was on WFAN, the sports station here in New York City, them doing a minute type of deal where they break down all the news and saying Vince McMahon had passed away at the end of that. So they were going out of their way to try to sell that he had passed away, which I thought was just they were going so deep into this that it felt very much what are they doing?
Yeah, and it was also yeah, just overall from top to bottom, like it didn't feel right,
No.
and like it felt like there were so many other instances where like they put their foot over the line, but like brought it back a little bit. Like, I mean, you got Katie Vick, you got all
Right.
sorts of like like, but why? But like, do you really need to be doing this?
Right.
And this
Right.
felt like one of those like, why is this even a thing?
And I don't know what the plan was for uh the angle, but I think what
Right.
the plan was that he was going to eventually reveal that he faked his own death so that people appreciated him. Um, but it's just like, what? Who can? Why then? Like, what is the deal? Like, and it's all this stuff, and you see it now, where if you've got this whole big scenario going on with Vince McMahon, and the first thing he can't think to do is, I'm going to show up on TV. Let's build up ratings. Do whatever it takes to
I
get a
mean,
big rating.
nothing has changed. Nothing has
Yeah,
changed.
it's wild. So end of that week, literally 4 days later, June 15th, Sherry Martel passes away. Sensational Queen Sherry, who just went into the WWE Hall of Fame the year prior at WrestleMania 22 weekend. And I remember thinking, like, oh man, like the last thing WWE would have wanted in the middle of this is for somebody to pass away. And I'm like, are they still gonna, full steam ahead with this? And they did. Despite all of that going on, they decided to continue on with the angle. And then that leads to the Vengeance 2007 pay-per-view. The faithful night, June 24th, 2007. The match that was promoted and was supposed to happen was the finals of the ECW Championship Tournament, where it was supposed to be CM Punk against Chris Benoit. And Chris Benoit does not show up to the event. He's replaced by a rechristened Johnny Nitro as John Morrison. And John Morrison actually wins the ECW title. And people are very upset that Benoit's not there. It's a big deal. It's a big story. Before you knew anything, I think we were watching this show together, because I do remember the main event being a strange kind of multi-man match for the title. What do you remember thinking? It was weird Benoit didn't show up, and did you think in a million years that this is what happened?
I thought it was very weird, because that kind of thing didn't happen.
Right.
And it didn't happen where they didn't really say why they weren't there.
Right.
Like there's a lot of like either legitimate injuries or vacation injuries that happened over the course of wrestling, where it's announced beforehand though, and it's
Right.
not definitely for like a main event caliber booked match where all of a sudden something suddenly came up and this wrestler needs to be replaced.
Right.
I can't think of really very many other instances where that has happened.
Yeah, I remember for me, because you'd go to because we went to so many indie shows, and you never knew if somebody was going to show up, because it'd be an indie show. So a lot of times people would no-show the show. They wouldn't give a crap. They'd be unprofessional. There'd also be the times where Stone Cold walked out on WWE, so I thought maybe Benoit was pissed because he was champion just a couple years prior, and it was clear that like the years after this, he was kind of taking some time, like falling back down the card a little bit. So I thought maybe he was a little unhappy with his spot in the company. Maybe he had a dispute with WWE. But yeah, it was very, very strange, and I definitely was not thinking at all, though, that something horrible had occurred. But I will say that you just didn't expect this from Chris Benoit. He always seemed like the most professional guy. For him to not show up just seemed like a strange deal.
Yeah, definitely.
So this leads to, and I'm not going to get into all of I don't want this. This is a SummerSlam 2007 retrospective podcast. I don't want this to become a big, huge, the ins and outs of everything related to Chris Benoit. But obviously, why he didn't show up to Vengeance, he passes away. He's found dead, as his son and his wife. The next day, when you hear that Chris Benoit has passed away, what were you thinking?
I mean, just shock. Like,
yeah,
just so shocked that anything happened. It made sense looking back, and I was like, oh well, like,
yeah. And I mean, he was somebody for you one of your favorites. I mean, we have you went to WrestleMania 20. He was somebody who brought one of the major moments of that show, obviously, is Benoit winning the title and afterwards celebrating with Eddie Guerrero in the ring. And now here we are, just 3 years removed from that, and one of the biggest stars in all of wrestling is dead. It was heartbreaking, especially just a year and a half after losing Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of like the biggest thing was it felt like, losing them so close together was the most like shocking part, as it turns out for very different reasons, of course. But
right, and I remember for me, when Eddie Guerrero passed away, you had texted me kind of a famous story. I was in the big bus terminal, Grand Central Station in New York City, running through there, and I remember I got a text from you that just said Eddie Guerrero passed away. And looking back, I'm not sure what else. Like I at least appreciated my sister's done. You're never going to believe who passed away. And then it's like becomes this really awkward, awful guessing game. Right. So I at least appreciated that, or you're never going to believe what happened to this person.
Yeah. And that, that's always the worst when it's like, did you hear about so-and-so? Like, it's right. Like, oh, okay. Like, did he die? Did he get arrested? Like, well, what happened?
Right. Exactly. So I appreciate it, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I stopped there. Eddie Guerrero was like seemingly good and had seemingly gotten better and overcome all these demons, and now to just die tragically was horrible. And so then you find out that Benoit, that I got a call from my buddy Matt, and he said, "Did you hear why Benoit?" And I'll never forget the way that he said it. He called me on the phone. I think I was running late to a shift over at your favorite and mine, the Little Neck Stop and Shop, and he's like, "Did you hear why Benoit missed Vengeance?" And I said, "No." And he said, "He's dead!" in the loudest screeching voice I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, holy crap. And he's like, yeah, oh my God. They're going to be going live on WWE.com with a press conference in a little while. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, all of a sudden, like, this is terrible. And then it blew up. It started becoming everywhere. He and his wife and his son had passed away. And I immediately thought, oh God, somebody had broken into his house and killed all three of them. And the press conference they did was, I think Vince McMahon was live in the ring from the arena. The crazy part about that is that WWE was promoting that Raw as a 3-hour Raw where all members of the roster were there for Vince McMahon's funeral. And they were going to do a tribute show to Vince McMahon, very similar to the shows they've done for Owen Hart and Eddie Guerrero, complete with the sad speeches in the room where the wrestler talks about memories of the person. Very nice tributes, and it was all going to be kind of done tongue-in-cheek to the point that they had a casket and kind of the whole deal where the big like limousine type thing that they the hearse that they come into. His actual real life brother, who just passed away last year, was there and was going to actually be there to give a tribute to Vince McMahon. All this nonsense they were doing, and then this breaks, and Vince McMahon goes live, says obviously that it was an angle. They have no choice at this point but to just cut the stupid Vince McMahon is dead angle, and he announces that Benoit is dead and that they're doing a tribute on Raw that night.
And yet, I feel like they had to convince him to drop the angle.
Oh, I think for sure. I bet he came in and was like, how do we continue this?
Yeah, like how can we do both?
Right.
Can we make it like a joint kind of thing where we're celebrating both of us? And to be honest, in hindsight, like maybe that would have been the better option after hearing what came out and everything. Like to had they not said anything, not said anything other than Chris Benoit has passed away until all of the other stuff came out about this, maybe to kind of but on the same time, like the fact that Vince was murdered, it wasn't like a suicide thing or anything like that. Like the fact that it was him like blowing up a limousine, maybe I guess they should have cut it either way, but like hindsight being 2020, like what they did maybe was not the best move.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem for them always is that they have to have the show go on. They can't just, hey, this shit is going on right now and things are messed up and the talent is clearly shook. Let's just take the night off. We're not on there. We're gonna rerun Vengeance on live TV tonight. Watch the show, enjoy it. That match will be cut, and we'll be back next week on Raw. Give it a little bit of time for this to develop, because I remember when the tribute show had happened, and I told you this before we went on air, my father called me and was, I can't believe they're doing a tribute. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, isn't it clear that he's the one who did this? And I was just like, how could you ever say that? Chris Benoit would never do something like that. And he was like, I don't know. I mean, the guy's living in a gated community. I don't know if anyone's breaking into his house to do this. And I was like, no, I'm thinking, no way. And so you watch the tribute show, and for the first, I think, like 2 hours of that show, it's they have the in memory of, and they have Benoit and Nancy and Daniel, and the picture of the three of them on the bottom of the screen with all these wrestlers giving these tributes. And all of them have these really heartfelt tributes, except William Regal, who kind of says something like really eerie. And I'm even getting goosebumps as I'm thinking about it here, because it really was. It was like, he was like, I think I'm going to hold off on giving my judgment right now. Let's wait till the facts unfold. And he kind of knew, I think. And then later on, they actually find out before Raw ends that Benoit does it, because it starts to break in the middle of that show.
Yeah.
And so they change it from like that, the three of them on the bottom of the screen, to just Benoit there and just play his matches to end out the show. I don't know if that was the right call. I think at that point, I'm not sure what you do. But I think if they just waited a day, that would have been the thing to do, is just, hey, this show's, dedicated to Chris Benoit. Here's Vengeance from last night. Let's go home. And because the next night they do a SmackDown like nothing happened. Show has to go on, and they film SmackDown. And I mean, if you go on Peacock, that Benoit Raw has been replaced by like greatest championship matches. And the SmackDown is just a show. Like, it's just like they just picked it up.
Well, and rightfully so, because
yeah.
But that is the problem with having a P.T. Barnum type runner, where the show must go on, and we're going to make we're gonna make the most out of it. We're gonna make lemonade out of this and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, but that's kind of also what happens, where you run the risk of, when you create this whole thing around this person that turns out to not be who, with all the story and everything, where it's not what you thought at the beginning.
Yeah.
Especially when it's live. Like,
yeah.
If they had like taped it and then said, okay, we're going to do this for SmackDown instead. We're going to tape this whole thing on Monday, whatever, and then we're going to play it later. And then it finds out. You have time to not play it.
Right. Exactly.
When you put it on live, and then you find out mid-show the horrible details of what happened, now you're scrambling, and now you're probably not going to make a right decision, because the right decision would have been to not do this in the first place.
Right.
But
and it was. I mean, it was such a scare. I think I cut you off as you were going to say something. Yeah, it was I mean, it really was. It was such a shocking deal. It became a very strange time to be a fan. I mean, I know the guys at Talking Taker have talked about how this got them to stop watching for like years. They're one of their favorite wrestlers doing something so horrible and an awful act like this. I think for us, one of the I wonder if, I don't know if I'd ever stop. But I do wonder if part of the reason why we continue to just mosey on and continue to watch is because we did have SummerSlam tickets. Because these tickets for SummerSlam went on sale in December of 2006, and I think we got them like right away. The show sold out in like 30 minutes. I wonder if that played a role.
I think it was also kind of like we were so more like invested and engrossed in just the event of pro wrestling more than anything. It wasn't, especially for you, where you were going to Ring of Honor and TNA and like all this other sort of stuff. Like, it's not so much like, when you are so diverse, it's not so necessarily like, I'm going to stop watching WWE. I'm going to stop wrestling altogether, because you do have those other shows. And I mean, I'll be honest, now that I've started watching again, I really only have been watching AEW. I really haven't been paying too much attention to WWE.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it is. It's definitely. I think you're right, and I think that for me, I remember it being one of these deals where once this happened for the next like 3 weeks, this was the only story. Like you could not escape it. It was on every news station, every ESPN, every Sports Center, ESPN News, which I typically used to go to sleep with each night. I just play it on while I fell asleep. You couldn't. They just updated Benoit every 10 minutes. It was awful. Like it was just a terrible time to be a fan. It was scary. It was awful. And I mentioned earlier that I was working at the time with individuals on the autism spectrum. And when Vince McMahon did the angle where he passed away, they were heartbroken by this. Heartbroken, like really sad. And I had to sit down with each one of them, kind of go through a therapy and explain that this is a part of the show. He didn't really pass away. And then you come to find out Benoit happens 2 weeks later. And they're like, we know it's not real because we've just been told this other guy was part of the show.
Why would you?
Now it's like, guys, no, this one actually happened. And so it was really tough for them. I remember like one of the deals, I think like the headlines on one of the newspapers that was like all over New York, maybe it was the New York Post, probably the New York Post, said like Benoit kills son because he's disabled. And like that was really hard. Like
that sounds like a New York Post headline, yeah.
Right, like something awful like that, yeah. So yeah, it was a really, really tough time to be a fan. This immediately does impact SummerSlam 2007 because the big deal going into SummerSlam 2007 and the big storyline was going to be that Umaga was going to be taking on the entire cast of Jackass, which at the time was like a huge deal. Like this was gigantic. The cast of Jackass. I mean, not only is Johnny Knoxville a big deal, but Steve-O's a big deal. Bam Margera's a big deal. Ryan Dunn is a pretty big deal. Wee Man's a big deal. So it's like they're supposed to be having this big match. But when this does occur, and the plan was actually that they were going to show up at the Great American Bash 2007 and cost Umaga the Intercontinental title in his match with Jeff Hardy. Instead, that does not happen. Johnny Knoxville gets cold feet, and so they pull out of the match. And they stop all of the promotion for it. They get rid of the entire promotion for it. And they end up stopping. They just have to reshuffle the entire deck because they didn't want to do it. I think they just decided without Knoxville, there's no reason to have the rest of the cast there. So even though they had done a lot of promotion in the magazines, they had an official poster with like Umaga standing over all the cast of Jackass, all their heads kind of buried into the sand. And even though they even filmed a commercial with Umaga and Steve-O, they scrapped the entire deal and they had to go for some other promotion because Johnny Knoxville at the time actually thought he had a burgeoning film career and didn't want to be associated with WWE.
I mean, he did have a burgeoning movie career, just didn't really go anywhere after like Men in Black and...
Oh, Men in Black! I forgot about that.
Yeah, Men in Black 2, and then he had the I forget what it was called, but it was the one where he fakes being special needs in order to get into the Special Olympics.
Oh God, I didn't see it because it sounded like the worst freaking. I do think there was parts of it that were actually kind of endearing, and I do think he did a lot of like promotion for that to actually shine a light on the great work that the folks at the Special Olympics were doing. But it was still like, I don't know.
Yeah, that wasn't the bad part.
Right.
Of that movie. I remember watching it, and I remember that not being the bad part. It was just not a good movie overall, but it was like that did not make it bad.
Right.
There was a lot of other things that made that movie bad, but that was not part of it. I'm blanking on the name.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Movie, but
First Boy, My Lucky Boy, something like that. No. Wasn't he also in
The Ringer? That's what it was.
The Ringer, yes. Yeah. So John Knoxville pulls out. I think in retrospect, I think WWE was underestimating how much the other members of Jackass really meant to like people. There was a popular show, and I think without Knoxville, they should have kept it going, especially because I don't think this was going to be your main event. I mean, Umaga wasn't. He was a big deal in WWE, but he wasn't a main guy. And I think at that point, if there were other people still on board, they should have done it just because I think they were trying to do whatever it took to repair their image at this point.
Yeah. Didn't they come on later and do something? Like, I feel like years later.
Johnny Knoxville just did a whole bunch of stuff at WWE this year.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, so I mean, 15 years later, but yeah, he was in the Rumble, and then he had one of the most entertaining matches with Sami Zayn at at WrestleMania. So they did eventually become a big deal, and it was so much fun. I couldn't stop telling Ari, my wife, that if they had done this match at SummerSlam 2007 with Umaga, it would have been a great time.
Oh yeah, like and you know, and like again, looking back on it, I was like, but why why push Umaga like this? He's not that good. But looking back on his match, I changed my opinion on him.
Oh yeah, no, he was great, and I mean, especially like I think also part of it was amongst our group of friends at this time. We'll get a little more into it as we talk about the show. I know, like, we used to do the Shamoan Bulldosher all the time. That I think we made Umaga kind of a joke, even though he was a pretty badass Samoan dude.
I think again, the Samoan Spike is a horrible finisher.
It is weird.
Like he had so many other good moves and so many other things that he could have done as a finisher that like.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway.
So now WWE is, as we start to get into the SummerSlam 2007 show here, 43 minutes into our show. But I thought that stuff was important to talk about, and I think that it sets the stage here to create a picture as to what everything was going on in the as we get towards this show, because in doing so, WWE, with the 20th anniversary of SummerSlam coming about, they decide they're gonna create this buzz the entire summer long and basically make it so that WWE is the most fan-friendly product out there. They're going to put the emphasis on the fans and repairing their image as best as they possibly can. So what they end up doing is throughout the entire summer, WWE is all over the place. Every place you go, there's a WWE booth. There's WWE appearances. Superstars are everywhere. You have opportunities to meet everyone. Two that come to mind for me. This was middle of August, I want to say, or definitely August 2007. We went to the Warped Tour, which I believe was held either at Jones Beach or at Nassau Coliseum. That year, it was not held at the place with all the dirt. Remember, we used to go to that place, Randall's Island?
Yeah, Randall's Island. It would have been at Nassau.
Nassau Coliseum. Yeah. And so we went there for that. It was weird because it was outside, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember we met Mr. Kennedy at that show, and he was the superstar we met in the booth, and he was actually fun. He was very nice. Do you remember meeting him?
Yeah, I remember being a big fan of his.
Oh, I was huge. Yeah.
Just for his promos and like his entrance and all that stuff. Like, I thought that was great.
Yeah, I always say every time WWE, to this day, 15 years later, every time WWE goes to Green Bay, Wisconsin, I always hope they bring out Mr. Kennedy, because I think his entrance was incredible. His whole, he hails from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and like when they were in Green Bay, they just ate this guy up. Like, he was just awesome. And we'll talk about his downfall because it's all related here to the show, unfortunately. But I remember meeting him at Warped Tour and asking him, if I didn't have a question for a wrestler, my go-to is always, what would you say is your favorite match? And he actually thought about it and then gave me the exact date of the SmackDown that he had a match in which he had a match with Matt Hardy, and he said that was his favorite match. And I remember being like, Matt Hardy's literally my favorite wrestler. So I was like really excited about that. Then a couple weeks later, in I think the most barbaric and awful idea for a show of all time, we went to Ozfest, and that particular year it was free. It was free Ozfest. So you had every person who had never really been out of their house go to a show, and it was chaos. It was brutal. It was like, and we had pit tickets. We didn't even have seats. So people were at their absolute worst. The drug use was over the top. The tailgating was brutal. People were being pulled out of there. It was an insanely awful idea. and we went. I remember one of us getting thrown to the floor. I don't know if it was myself or Danny or you. Somebody got thrown to the floor randomly by a guy who looked like the Undertaker, American Badass. It was just, it was insane.
I want to say that might have been Danny because I know he disappeared like into the pits and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember we were sitting back like in like a grassy area,
Yeah.
and there was a guy that was like 6'7" guy, like 300-pound guy that was like skipping around, and he was just like drunk or whatever off his ass and just like
Hitting
skipping
people.
around, knocking everybody over.
Yeah, it was insane. It was very far away, I remember.
Yeah, it was in like the boonies of New Jersey.
Yeah, I think you had driven us, and I want to say, Danny lit us joint the back, or rolled the joint in the back of the car, and I definitely didn't smoke at the time. I still don't, but I know that even if other folks in the car did, it was like, what are you doing, dude? Like, no respect at all.
Well, and the fact that he was sitting in the middle of a two-door car, like,
yeah,
he was sitting in the middle of the back seat of a two-door car. Yeah, whatever.
And it was because it was a free festival. They didn't have the funding to go and get gigantic bands for it. So, like Ozfest 2002, for example, you had every huge act in music on this festival at the time. System of a Down, like Ozzy, obviously, Drowning Pool, who just came out with Bodies. So it was like a bunch of huge acts. This one, it was like, I want to say, I know Ozzy was on the show, Lamb of God was on the show, and those types of, I know Five Finger Death Punch, they were on the rise. They were on that show. That was my favorite act of the whole night.
I want to say Zakk Wylde was there too.
Well, Zakk Wylde was with Ozzy, and then you're right. I think that
like by himself.
There. Yeah. And then they have that great band that was like from a different country, and they were all like robotic.
That was at Bamboozle.
Oh, what was that band's name?
Lordy.
They were amazing.
Yeah.
Was that
with an I, not Lordy with an E, who was like the Australian pop singer, like not her.
Yes, and that was at Bamboozle. So was that same summer?
It might have been.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, we're all over, but I vividly.
Actually, that might have been 2008.
I think you're right, and I remember that was also very far away, if I'm not mistaken, Bamboozle.
That was also somewhere in New Jersey.
Yeah,
I'm blanking on the exact city, but yeah, it was No, not Ashbury. Maybe Ashbury.
And I remember we were there because I think we're into the next band, and Lordy came out. We were like, "What on earth is this?" And they blew us away, and were incredible.
It was like either get early for Muse,
yes,
or watch this band, and we chose watch that band, and I don't regret that decision.
No, they were great. But yeah, Ozfest was one of these deals where it was like, let's just try to make sure we survive. But one of the big highlights for me at this show was a trio of WWE superstars at the time. And Steve, do you remember who this trio was?
Now I do, because
I asked him a couple days ago.
I never would have guessed. Like it was definitely one of those things where like once you told me who it was, I was like, oh yeah. But I never would have guessed them. Like I would have guessed so many other different groups before them.
Yeah, they it was Deuce, Domino, and Cherry from the other side of the tracks, and they were doing a signing obviously for free at Free Ozfest. And I remember that you had to get a specific ticket stamped in order to meet them.
Yeah.
And we didn't get it. And when they were done with their signing, they went backstage, and I looked at them, and I had made contact with Domino, Cliff Compton, who went on to fame later on. And was just like, please, can you come back out? I was holding up my ticket for them to sign, and they came running back out, and they actually came specifically to us, took photos, and did all that. And then it could not have been a nicer group, probably because they were like, oh shit, someone's actually legit.
Right, somebody actually wants to meet us. So yeah, definitely.
Why the hell not? And this was all a part of WWE's search for the biggest fan. They had a variety of all these different types of signings leading up to SummerSlam. The 20th anniversary was a huge deal for WWE. And again, repairing that image. So one of the things they were doing, as we now get to SummerSlam weekend, and I always vlog now a lot. If I go to a show, I'll vlog. If you look at my WrestleMania vlog, I've got 5 days of WrestleMania stuff that like leads up to it. WrestleMania 35 that was here in New York, I think I did like 7 days of just nonstop wrestling. Back in 2007, this wasn't really something that existed, but for SummerSlam 2007, it did. because leading into that show, they had a big kickoff party. It was a big red carpet spectacular that led to a party later on that night in New York City. And it was a place called Spotlight Live. And the idea behind this place was that it was like a concert venue, but instead of going to see an act, you would see people do karaoke. So it looked like you were there to see a big music act, and then it would just be random Joes getting up there to sing karaoke. And on this Friday night, right before SummerSlam, the big exciting piece of this was that it was a night to go and see the WWE superstars do karaoke and then meet them afterwards. And so for me, it was Jillian Hall, of course, because gotta have Jillian doing her thing. And she was still doing the singing gimmick at the time.
Right.
Maria Kanellis, who was very new at the time, The Miz, MVP, and Mr. Kennedy. So those were the 5 acts, and the only ones that did karaoke were Miz, Jillian Hall, and Maria Kanellis. But the big thing was like meeting MVP and Kennedy, and this line was like endless. There was so many people there, and the point of this also was that you were supposed to try to make a video. There was a thing called Zitto.com that you're supposed to make a video explaining why you were the biggest WWE fan. And you had 15 seconds to explain it, and then they picked the top 15 people, brought them to Times Square, and had a variety of wrestlers be the judges, like Stone Cold, John Cena, variety of people, be the judges to determine who was the ultimate fan and who would eventually be the millionth WWE fan to enter the famed Continental Airlines Arena. And it was a lot of fun. I think the winner got, $25,000 in front row seats to SummerSlam. And that fan also got their 1 millionth number retired into the rafters of the Continental Airlines Arena.
That's pretty cool.
I know this because when I went to see Slipknot at the Izod Center before it closed in 2015, it was still retired.
Wow.
All the way up, it said WWE SummerSlam 1 million 2007. And I was like, oh my gosh. So pretty darn cool that they did something like that. And meeting the wrestlers was great. I remember Miz was incredible. I remember telling him that at the time I had like an entire plan to pretty much mirror the Miz's rise, except I was going to be on Big Brother.
Right.
Which I did try out for and made it through several cuts. Right before the last cut would have been the trip to LA to try to get onto the show.
Right.
I did that and I didn't make it past there. But I actually got like a producer call me and explain why, which I thought was great. And I remember explaining this to Miz, and Miz was like, aim higher. Gotta aim higher than me. And I was like, no, but he was awesome. And I became a huge fan of him from that. And then fast forward 4 years later, my first WrestleMania I go to, he's in the main event as the champion. I'm like, this is awesome.
I was gonna say, like, he did pretty well for himself in the end. So
yeah, two-time WWE champion. He's got a reality show on USA, married to Maurice. Married to Maurice might be the number one accomplishment there. So he's got a beautiful family. So yeah, definitely Miz is awesome. And MVP was great. And MVP was sitting there talking with the fans, and he was trying to get fans to actually do his hair, because there were people that were going to do his hair, that were volunteering to do his hair. And he was like, yeah, if you can do my hair, I'll come to your store and you can do it before the show. That'd be great. And then I'll pump up your stuff as best I possibly can. Probably on his MySpace. But Ken Kennedy was really pissed. These guys were there way later than they were supposed to. Kennedy was like, why are they just still letting people in? And was visibly angry and screaming about, why did they close the damn door and stop the people? And I remember MVP saying, if he's unhappy, he can go home. No one's here to see him. And right. It was like this really uncomfortable type deal. But yeah, and then you met him and he was like just scribbling up the, writing his things all angry, and we went away. So it was a bad experience with Kennedy, not like the experience that we had at Warped Tour with him. But I could also understand like that side of it. It's a free signing. It's supposed to be you end at a certain time. These guys probably have another 3,000 things going on before SummerSlam. Yeah. I kind of get the frustration there.
Yeah. Although I am kind of surprised that they didn't throw out like Lillian Garcia or somebody out there like as like a ringer.
Oh, you mean like to sing?
Yeah, because like didn't Lillian like actually release like albums?
She should have been there. Yeah, she should have been. You're right. Yeah. So then the next night, Ring of Honor, Manhattan Mayhem 2 took place at the Manhattan Center. I'm not sure if you were with us at this show.
I remember going.
So you might have been there. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
remember going. I don't remember, like, I honestly don't remember if we were sitting with you for some reason. I don't remember if I went with other people or like,
I don't know. I think
like,
that
I
makes
remember
sense.
going.
Yeah, I do remember. I think what might have happened was maybe you were seated and we kept leaving to go stand somewhere to
I
get a
think
better
that's what it
view.
was.
And you were like, I'm not going to go stand like a fool,
Yeah.
like standing in the end. What are you doing? Right.
Right.
So this was in the Manhattan Center. So not even in the Hammerstein Ballroom, but in the much smaller Manhattan Center. That's like several stories up where they used to film the old episodes of Raw.
Yeah.
And was double main evented by Bryan Danielson going up against Takeshi Morishima in a match that is remembered for Morishima knocking Bryan's eye out of his head or out of his socket and Bryan popping it back in and continuing the match. Amazing stuff. Probably one of my favorite live Ring of Honor matches I've ever been to. And then the main event saw the Briscoes defeating the team of Kevin Steen and El Generico, who are now Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn in WWE. So very, very cool stuff.
It's crazy how I mean, obviously, like, that's what a lot of, like, Ring of Honor, as far as definitely around that time, 2007, where it's like, that is where the up and coming guys were. Like, that's where Samoa Joe got to start and everything. Like, so it's so weird how now, 15 years later, like, those are household names within the wrestling world. Like,
unbelievable. Yeah. I'll never forget. We went to a show, I want to say in Connecticut or something. I went to a Denny's afterwards, and somebody from the roster walked past us, and I said, like, hey man, good show. And then after, so he was like, thanks man. He went and sat in the booth, and then coming behind him was the rest of the roster.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. And I remember Austin Aries came in and he looked right at our table. He's like, not a word. And so the whole roster there, but it was like who's who of like the big stars in TNA and the big stars in WWE years later, and now AEW, and so many of them started in that Ring of Honor deal. And guys like El Generico and Kevin Steen, for me, I was like, these guys will never be in WWE. They were just not what WWE was looking for. And they're two of the biggest stars. Kevin Owens, a former champion, and fought Stone Cold Steve Austin in the main event of WrestleMania this year. So crazy to see where all that comes from.
There you go.
So that show was great. And then finally we get over to the Continental Airlines Arena. And before the show starts, there was another meet and greet, a cavalcade, so to speak, of stars. And no, I do not mean a small parade for you Disney fans out there. It was a really random. This was like, it was set up in the, what was it, like a random, like, I think it was like way before the show started. If I'm not mistaken.
It was like in a different build, like an adjacent building or something.
Yeah, and it was like, I want to say at like 12 noon or 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so now you've got, do you remember who was there? Who signed for us that day?
I remember at least one person.
Is it the back?
Yeah, Matt Stryker.
Matt Stryker. Right. Oh, I forgot. Okay, so I know it was Chris Masters, Matt Stryker, Crime Time, and of course your favorite and mine, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And I know this because Flair was chatting with Masters the entire time, and neither of them acknowledged our existence.
Yeah. Yep.
But did you bring your yearbook to have Matt Stryker sign it?
I didn't. I wanted to.
Oh, that would have been awesome.
I forgot it.
Yeah, that would have been incredible. Because I don't know if they told us who was signing.
Like maybe, and like it didn't click until we got there or something like that.
Yeah, that would have been an amazing. Like I can't even. It would have just been like, I wonder if someone at some point had to have done this.
Yeah,
because we used to go.
Well, like it, you have a very narrow window of kids that would have been able to do it, because I think he was only teaching at Cardozo for like a year.
Yeah.
And it had to have been whoever happened to be in his class, because I didn't have it. I didn't have him. My girlfriend at the time had him.
Oh, she did?
Yeah. So like I would wait for her outside of her class to get out, and like see. And I remember like a couple of times, like I was like sitting on the windowsill, and he would like yell at me about sitting on the windowsill and stuff. So it's like,
wow, very, very crazy. I vividly remember suddenly seeing a variety of Cardozo High administration members at random independent wrestling shows that we went to.
Yeah.
And not fully putting it all together that he was working there until you would tell me, oh, you know why they're here? He's actually a teacher now at Cardozo. And then eventually he gets busted and leaves. So I remember Stryker, and I remember we were really pumped for him. He was like the guy we were really there to see. Him and Crime Time, because Crime Time at the time was like the big thing amongst our group of friends, even more so than the Samoan Bulldozer, because we were doing the whole summer. Every time it was time to pay, every time it was time to go to work, it was, I'd have money. Yeah, I'd have money. And that was like a huge thing. I think this is their first run in WWE before they get released. And they were really on the rise of becoming one of the hottest acts in WWE.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where it was like, were they really actually that popular, or did we just make them that popular in our group? Like,
I agree. I'm not, and I don't know the answer to that. But I do know, like, for example, when Jillian Hall was around, and all of us, like, I burned her CD because she put out a Christmas album, and at a CPX gifted it to Binder, and we all listened to it, and she became like a cult hero amongst our group of people. And so you're right. I think we had a few people like that where it was like that was our guy, and these people were our group. And then they were the coolest at a signing where people weren't. And this was I would eventually go and when we do our retrospective coming up here in about 6 months for the Royal Rumble 2008, I meet Ric Flair again, and he blows me off and does not acknowledge me a second time. And I think that I understand they're free signings, so I do recognize that. I could even understand a little bit unhappiness, but to not even acknowledge, like even Cranky Kennedy on Friday night before was at least like, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. Goodbye. Which I get, but to not even acknowledge people, I've only had it happen, and met a bunch of other people, and I've only had it happen at Access WrestleMania 35, where it was Gallows and Anderson, and they continued their conversation and never even acknowledged who we were. And it's just one of the weirdest and really just shittiest things I think that someone can do.
Yeah, I mean, not that I ever had a very high opinion of Ric Flair personally. Like, I know this is probably sacrilege to a lot of older wrestling fans, like, where like he's seen as one of the best ever. I never understood it. So, like, to me, a snub wasn't it didn't shatter anything for me. It was like, yeah, no, good. Fuck you too. Like,
right. It's very true. Yeah, no, I for me, I just think it is, I think it just left a little bit of a sour taste. And then eventually we move on to go to actually SummerSlam 2007 proper. And in doing so, what were your thoughts, and what were your, I guess, as we're going into the show now, and before we even get in, if you remember, what were some of the things you were thinking about?
Not much that I can remember, to be perfectly honest.
So I remember 3 big things. Number 1, I was amped beyond belief at this point, because you got to remember, I've now had 2 signings. I've had a Ring of Honor show the night before, and I'm now going into this SummerSlam show. And for me, I'm like, this is the granddaddy. This is the main event. This is what all this has been building to. And I realized probably from this show that doing that sometimes can really lead to unrealistic hype that isn't going to be reached.
Yeah, and I will say, actually, thinking about it now, the one thing that I do remember about it was this being one of the very few times where I was actually rooting for Triple H to win.
Right.
Like, hardcore, actually actively rooting for him to win.
Yeah, it was. I remember the crowd, too, was ungodly amped for Randy Orton. Like, Orton was at his height, probably his top of people being into his character. The Legend Killer thing had kind of resurfaced because he just put Shawn Michaels on the shelf.
Yeah.
He was reinventing himself quite a bit. From a personal standpoint, I had not really started wearing jeans or caring about the way I looked at all at this stage for whatever reason in my life. I don't know why. I'd always wear swishy pants and a wrestling t-shirt pretty much every single day. But seeing Orton come out in Affliction, seeing Orton come out in jeans, to me, I was like, that guy looks pretty cool. Why can't I do the exact same thing? And that is one of the things that really, in my opinion, reinvented myself. So like, screw it, I'm just going to wear jeans. The Affliction looks cool, and I'm representing a fighter here. I'm going to wear this. And that is really, I'd say, probably 2000. It didn't happen really till 2008 or 9, but that's when I really started to reinvent myself and change a lot of who I was as a person as well. rather than just this fun-loving wrestling guy who would just go to all these wrestling shows. At some point, it came to a point where I was like, I'd actually like, to do other things, have a bit of a social life and go do these other things. And I actually do attribute a lot of that to Randy Orton showing up on Raw and looking pretty darn cool.
I would also attribute that to that's kind of what happens in college, just across the board, like especially even though you were kind of towards the tail end of it, but
it's very true. I think also, you and Toby being around and wanting to go to the gym, and then me being like, hey, if I wanted to still hang out with my friends, I got to go to the gym. So I may as well just go. So then it became like, wanting to lose weight, all these different things. And eventually I decided I'm going to dress as Jeff Hardy for Halloween. And I was not going to be a fat Jeff Hardy. That was my thing. And I did everything I could to lose a shit ton of weight. And that's really kind of how I kind of went from there.
It would be mean to say that you could have definitely gone as Matt instead.
So I should have just gone as Matt. Could have just put a little Matt Hardy shirt on. I got a little wig tied up the back of my hair.
Do the pencil mustache, the pencil neck beard type of thing.
Yeah, maybe shave the sides of my hair there, and could have just been Matt Hardy and not had to go through so much suffering for no damn reason whatsoever. But yeah, so in any event, so people were really into Randy Orton. People were over John Cena at this point. They were ready for a title change. And I also remember going into the show, there was we had some interesting company with us at the time. I loved my buddy Matt at the time, but he was rooting for every heel all the time. I think part of his was like he was doing the trolling thing before trolling was a thing.
I think trolling was a thing, but like it was just starting to be a thing.
Right. So let me go and cheer for every heel, no matter what. I remember we went to a show with a bunch of the people I supported, who individuals with autism. And Tatanka came out, and Binder was booing Tatanka out of the building, despite the guy being a babyface, and everyone getting really upset at him, and him just taking it all in as this was the greatest. And so that's going into SummerSlam 2. And I also remember the other person we had company with not really being a fan, and so she, by her just being there, kind of put a downer on a lot of the hype and excitement. For all of us. I hate to say that just in case she's watching, I'll feel so bad. But that was the truth. So, what can I say? Steve Laps already fell off camera. I was hoping he was okay. But yeah. So that was the truth. You have to go to a show with people who share your mindset to a certain extent, at least your excitement level, or it'll bring down your own excitement level.
So what I would say about that is that, when we went to NXT a couple of years ago, weird to think that it was a couple of years ago at this point. But when we went to NXT, I had absolutely no idea who any of those wrestlers were. But I still went in with excited to go and watch this wrestling show. I was excited to participate. I was excited to go and, kind of reinvigorate my interest for it.
Yeah.
If you go to a wrestling show and you are not interested in any of the wrestlers and you don't really care about anything that happens and you're not going to participate as a crowd member, you have to participate as an audience member. I feel when you go to a wrestling show, it's the same thing with going to a concert. When you go to a band concert, you want to be standing up and singing along, or you want to be you want to feel like you're part of this crowd. That's why you go to a show instead of not sitting at home and watching it on TV.
Right.
100%. It's an experience, and you want to fully participate in that experience. If you don't, what is the point of going?
Yeah. If this is you're doing this instead of going to a coffee shop or a restaurant, it's not going to be the same thing. No one wants to sit there and have a big catch-up conversation in the middle of a wrestling show. They want to suspend their disbelief, forget about the crap in their life for a bit, and become fully invested in the show. That's what I love. And that's what I loved about Matt and his girlfriend at the time was, normally we'd go to shows, they'd have big signs with them because they were just ready to be a fan. Unfortunately, because we got tickets right when they went on sale and went for the cheapest seats, our seats were absolutely horrendous for this show.
Horrible.
It was the worst seats I had ever been to until WrestleMania 35. Where we were lower level, but right behind the stage, so you couldn't see the stage at all. We were so high up. We were in the nosebleeds. way behind the Titantron.
Yeah.
And it took us out of the excitement of being there. It was like, it would have been better just to watch it at home if we were going to.
Yeah, it definitely did. And had we known that was going to be the experience, maybe we would have thought twice about it. But I think we were just so excited to go to this show.
Right.
And for it to be SummerSlam, going to SummerSlam, it's the second, maybe second or third to WrestleMania or Royal Rumble. So,
and it's just the idea of it's the cap of the summer. It's right there. The summer's feeling great. Clearly, we've been building this up all month, and we get there, and then our seats are awful, and it's like, how do we even get into this here where things are? And this show, because of how terrible our seats were, I actually thought this SummerSlam was the worst of all time because of how bad that experience was, being in such a crappy event, to the point that myself, Matt, and his girlfriend were planning to take the day off the next day and go to Raw, which was in Boston. We did not, and you definitely were having none of that plan. I remember that specifically.
Yeah, no.
Why would we bother? Enough. At that point, we were like, I'm not sure. We need a little break from WWE. That was just awful. But upon rewatch, which we both watched this week, I actually think this is a pretty good show.
I think it's definitely a lot better than I thought it was going to be, both what little I remembered about it and also what I remembered just about the product at the time.
Right. Yeah, no, I also agree. And it was one of these things where every match that came out, I was like, this is gonna be rough. And then the matches happened, and they were all pretty okay. They were kept short, which I think really helped a lot. No match was more than 10 minutes except for the main event, and that really went, maybe Hunter's match, but that really went a long way.
Yeah, and I think and it was, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with most of this. There were a couple of still bumps in the road.
Yeah, I mean, I can't come out here and say, upon looking back, Great Khali had a lot of athleticism, because he didn't. He had none. But he looked really impressive. So I guess let's get into the actual show. One of the things that jumps out at me, first of all, I guess there was two things. One is the opening video package to the show, where they started off. You get kind of the breakdown of some of the bigger matches, and they go end now, and then the entire screen goes back, and they start to show you the rebuilding of Triple H. I thought this was really cool, actually. I thought this was great.
And I remember that I remember when it happened, and the clip of all of the officials and everybody helping him back out of the ring up the ramp. Yeah. That moment to me is just one of the top moments that's kind of burned into my memory. And I think maybe it's because they played it so many times in all of his different packages. And I remember leading up to this, there was the story of him going through rehab. There were a couple of other videos that they had played along the way of him going and doing the surgery and the rehab and all of this stuff.
Yeah, no. And it was we will rebuild him. And then it was overseeing, and it kind of intertwined with King Booker. Booker T had reinvented himself as King Booker at this time, and his big deal was he was unhappy that Triple H was going by King of Kings because he felt he was the rightful King of Kings.
Right.
And upon looking at this, I was remembering how funny Booker T was in his King Booker character, and I don't think I remembered how much I thoroughly enjoyed it until some of these video packages and some of his vignettes that you'd see throughout the night. I thought he actually did play this role really well.
I think it was one of those things for me where, because Matt was so hardcore rooting for him, he was such a huge fan that kind of took it away. It took something away from it for me. Right.
Because if Matt was booking the show, he would have booked Triple H for his big return to show up and lose. Yeah. Clean to King Booker. And it just was not what was going to happen. And the second thing, before we even get into the matches, the entrance here is incredible. It looks like they've created a beach entrance in the thing there with the tiki torches and the hammocks and everything. They created a real SummerSlam appeal here.
It reminded me a lot of Bash at the Beach. the old WCW.
Yes, except that was actually, I
here.
think, on a beach, right?
Yeah. I think it may have been once or twice, but either way, that was a lot of the set design going around it was very beachy and stuff. So yeah, there was like a boardwalk as the ramp and like that kind of thing.
For sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. So our first match here, and I groaned when like I sat down to watch this, and I had the wonder of the world is come. I was like, oh no, not Kane to start off. I mean, that I groaned like most people do every time the guy tweets these days. It was like, I mean, not excited to see Kane at all start off the show, because typically now the best match of the night is typically the match that opens the show.
Right.
So I thought, how do you start the show with Kane? And I almost felt like I was reverting back to my 2007 self, because post Kane unmasking, I'm very much like not into Kane. We literally for years would chant "Please retire" at the guy. We just were not into his character at all. So he comes out here. What were your thoughts going into this?
I mean, my thoughts, unfortunately, are very similar. Where I love that is still one of my favorite entrance songs. Like one of my favorite theme songs.
Yeah.
I still listen to it like when I'm at the gym.
That's Finger 11, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great song.
But I would agree, like post unmasking him, like there was just he used to be one of my favorite wrestlers, and now it's sadder nowadays, seeing how everything he's whatever he's become. But that's besides the point. It definitely felt like how far he fell. To go from being a world champion to being a world contender and all of those things, and like top to top, to opening the match against Finlay.
Right. Now Finlay's another guy who not due to anything he's ever done, but I do remember like we always used to do the theme song for Finlay. His name's Finlay and I love to fight. Okay. And we talk about him a good amount of the time, and I'd always add in my own, my name's Finlay and I love to fight, which was not his theme song, and he did not have a hearty belly laugh in there. But because of that, I feel like I enjoyed Finlay a lot more. So Finlay came out, I was like, all right, this should be at least decent. And actually, I like this match a lot.
It was, again, like, I did not have any sort of expectations for it at all. Yeah. So the fact that I did not immediately fall asleep or fast forward through it was good enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I remember watching it and being like, I know Steve watched this show. He probably didn't last very long because this match was tough. But it was pretty good. Like, it was not bad. And this is still early on with Hornswoggle, because they eventually do revamp the Vince McMahon angle and pretty much redo it a few weeks later. And instead of it being who killed Vince McMahon, it's who's Vince McMahon's bastard son. So Hornswoggle, in my opinion, once he becomes Vince McMahon's bastard son, he becomes like overexposed and just enough. But at this stage where he's still kind of Finlay's little bastard, where Finlay literally picks him up from under the ring like he's a table and throws him as a weapon, I think he's pretty funny. And I thought this was really good, and Kane got a win, which I was surprised about because I thought Finlay had him when he hit him with the shillelagh outside of the ring. But I liked the match a lot, and I thought it got the show off to a good start.
I would say that it got it off to a good start. Yeah.
Do you have the card in front of you? I want to make sure. I'm going to go off my memory here. I don't know if you can pull it up.
Yeah, I do have it.
All right. So next up, I think, is the triple threat match between Kennedy, Carlito, and Umaga. And this was changed. It was initially supposed to be a rematch from Great American Bash between Umaga and Jeff Hardy. Unfortunately, Hardy was suspended for undisclosed reasons before the show had began, which would be a sign of things to come, which we'll get into. But
15 years later, still a thing,
What's that?
15 years later, still a thing.
Yeah, still a thing. And Jeff would eventually become the world champion for WWE, but I think it was supposed to happen way earlier than it did. But he had been suspended in 2007 and 2008, and was one strike away from being completely fired from WWE. Yeah. So, just a sea of just unfortunate circumstances with Jeff. I think if he had not had these issues, I think he would have been, in the same sentences as the greatest of all time.
Yeah, definitely. He would be up there with like Orton and Cena.
Right. Yeah. And so instead, you get these three heels: Carlito, Caribbean Cool, Mr. Kennedy, and Umaga. Kennedy loved the entrance again, especially the whole drop of the
Yep.
microphone and all that. And I remember at the time when we were going to these Yankee games, Ian Kennedy was one of their relievers, and he'd come in to Kennedy's theme.
Yep.
And that was like, and he's still in the league, which is crazy to think 15 years later. He's had like a solid career as like a reliever who has bounced around. But I thought this match again was actually pretty good, short and sweet. And I thought Umaga came across looking like he was one of the next big things for WWE after this match.
Yeah. It was one of those things where both Kennedy and Umaga, I feel like suffered from a lack of like their move set, like their signature moves weren't right. They weren't there. Like Kennedy's thing was like he had the guy, like it was like a roll over, drop weird thing,
and it like just didn't look like it would have hurt the guy as much as it hurt him.
It looked like it always looked like he was like 6 inches from breaking his own neck.
It was like, Ken, why didn't you just pick him up into your arms like this and go straight forward? Wouldn't that have done more, just the same amount of damage?
I feel like
more.
It was more. It was like because like if you remember, John Cena has the FU, Brock has the F5. Like it was trying. I feel like it was trying to piggyback on those. Like I'm gonna get the guy up on my shoulders and then do something. CM Punk has the same thing where I forget what his move is.
Oh, the GTS. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, up on his shoulders and then does something else. Where I feel like it was, if I want to be one of those guys, I'm going to get up on my shoulders and then do something.
Right. And I feel like the moves for me that I always like, the finishing moves are, moves that can happen out of nowhere. The RKO, the Stone Cold Stunner, the 619, Ray can just hit you in the knees, you pop in the ropes, he flips around and hits you.
Yeah.
That move is like, it's coming. He's got to pick you up on the shoulders. He's set up for it. And it's just, it's clunky. You're right. It's not a great move there.
Clunky is a great word for it. Yeah.
And it's a shame with Kennedy because Kennedy, I don't know if he had anything to do with the killing of Vince McMahon, but he was 100% going to be the son of Vince McMahon. And if you think about it, if he were to get that, he's set up for life. Like he's still making appearances here today as one of the members of the McMahon family because they have no choice. Storyline wise, he's there. Hornswoggle, they got out of that by saying he was really Finley's son, then wrote them both off. But I feel like that would have been a huge thing for him, and it just did not happen.
Yeah, and with Umaga, it was like the Samoan Spike, like horrible finisher. And the thing is, like he had all these other moves that could have been his finisher instead.
Right.
Like the Samoan drop, like a bunch of other things that he did that looked really cool. And then you got the Samoan Spike, which, come on.
Well, he does. So there's one move where it reminded me a lot of Roman. I don't know I know you haven't watched too much Roman Reigns, but he's obviously Roman's cousin. Yeah. And Roman has the guy get up, and as the guy's getting up, Roman he goes onto the corner, and he does the big right, or something like that. And Umaga was doing something where the guy was getting up, and he went in the other corner, and he let out a big like Fa Samoa.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's awesome. Like it reminded me a lot of Roman. It's a shame Umaga, unfortunately, is gone within just a couple of years. He's passed away.
Yeah.
So that one is definitely tough. After this, probably one of my favorite highlights of the show. It is a backstage vignette where they are talking about, now Vince McMahon is over the top and he's doing way too much of Shock TV Vince McMahon nonsense. But the vignette, I could imagine us sitting in our seats and losing our minds over everything in this vignette because it has so much of what we enjoy. You have all these guys back there. You've got Armando Estrada. You have Coach. You have William Regal, Vince McMahon, and then Crime Time show up. And for whatever reason, start talking about the money. Yeah. And they all start doing a dance in a circle. And William Regal eventually joins in and just starts losing his mind, busting a move, going crazy, until eventually everybody leaves, leaving William Regal there to bump into Ron Simmons, who was another one of our group's absolute favorite people and who lets out a picture-perfect dang.
Yep. And still to this day, it's one of my favorite.
Especially
Ron
because
Simmons
like,
is one of my favorite backstage segments.
yeah, especially because like as it progressed, he would be like, you'd get there and both like Ron and the person would start looking at each other like, I know, go ahead, hit me with it, and then Ron would hit him with, damn, like
Yeah.
it was just great, and clearly that's just, I think that's because Crime Time was on the rise and they wanted to have a reason to shoehorn them into the show, and they were not on the show other than that. So,
Right.
really thought that was there. I didn't even check. Was there a on the thing? Does it show any sort of dark match that was on there?
There was actually.
Oh, there you go. Who was the dark match?
It was the World Tag Team Champions, Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch, defeating Paul London and Brian Kendrick, the aforementioned.
Very cool. That's a solid match. Probably that's as good as anything on the show itself. Is the next match, if I'm not mistaken, is it Rey Mysterio and Chavo Guerrero Jr.?
Yep.
So this was another thing. Not only was Triple H returning from injury, but Rey Mysterio Jr. was also returning from injury. And in one of the big things that he comes out, he's dressed as the Silver Surfer. What did you think of this costume?
I love Rey Mysterio. Like I love all of his costumes. Like I love all of the theme costumes. Like.
And I think this one is because The Rise of the Silver Surfer is coming out at the time.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I never saw that movie, but I thought this was a cool and unique look. Ray, again, is returning from a major injury. He's been out actually longer than Triple H. He's been out for 10 months. Chavo put him out. I'll be honest, I love Eddie Guerrero, love Rey Mysterio, love the SmackDown 6, that whole era. I've never been a Chavo Guerrero guy.
I don't know if it was his gimmicks, if it was something like he just kind of didn't do it for me. But like, yeah, Rey Mysterio, Eddie, like all of the Lucha guys, like, yeah, great. But Chavo, I don't know, like there was just something. This match was really good.
Yeah, it was. I think it's also like his music hit, and I can almost like see us picturing us in 2007 running to the merch stand, and in 2022 running to the restroom or running to go play with my daughter or something while Chavo was coming out, because the music, it's like, it just feels like such a downgraded type thing.
If it had not been Rey Mysterio's return, you'd probably be right.
Right. But it did feel like a huge deal. You're right with Ray.
So I
we definitely,
I feel like we would have stayed put during this one.
We definitely did. You're right. That's a very good point. And they built it up. He got so much pyro. Yeah. He got such a big thing. And when he gets to the ring, the crowd's just like so amped for him. And it felt like, I mean, they are trying to pull out all the stops on this show here. Not only are they giving you Triple H, but you're getting Ray's return too. And Ray obviously gets the win here, which he should have on his big return match.
Yeah. And the only thing that would have made it better is if he would have been able to come up with his like coming out of the stage entrance.
Yes, he didn't do that. I wonder if that's
that's probably because of the stage. Like.
Oh, right. Good call. Yeah. You're right. He doesn't do that. He runs out. That's a good point. I wonder if that's the first time he didn't pop up like that.
Maybe it's because I don't know when he started to do that. That's the thing. Did he start to do that like before?
Yeah, he started to pop up when he came to WWE.
Oh, okay.
That was like his big. Who's that jumping out? This guy.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because this was also when he comes out to POD instead.
I wonder if that's one of the. No, it wasn't his first time because he did it when he won the title in 2006. POD was there live to perform.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was cool to see him back, and really, really good stuff. Next up, I want to say is the Divas Battle Royal.
Sure is.
There you go. What was your first thought when this one pulled up?
That I could go to the bathroom and not miss anything.
It's so sad because like that was 100%. I think the reason why the Divas matches were in WWE TV back in the day was to position them where you just had Ray and Chavo, big emotional excitement for Ray's return. Run the Divas out there so people have a chance to collect themselves, go use the restroom, get their merch. I went and got that Summerslam 2007 shirt that I sold like the cheap son of a gun I am many years later, and regret it to this day. But you know that is why they're there. They're there to break up the show and get people so they can get ready for whatever's coming afterwards.
Right. Well, and the fact that this is back to back with another non-wrestling in-ring segment.
Yes.
That's exactly what this is for. But I will say it was not as bad as I remember the women's wrestling division being.
100%.
I think that's because we actually paid attention this time.
Right.
I don't know.
This watching it on this rewatch is probably the first time we've seen this.
Yeah, that's very positive. Yeah,
that we were out the door and getting food and doing what we needed to do.
I will say also though, one of the things that I kind of had like a mini epiphany, where one of the reasons why the women's divisions were so bad is like at least 75% attributed to Jerry the King Lawler's horrible commentary throughout this.
Oh yeah, and he's still doing that in these matches too, which is like, it's way past him doing this in the Attitude Era and being annoying.
It was annoying then. It was just, it felt uncomfortable then, and even now, 15 years later, it feels exponentially worse.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like it could never happen in 2022.
But also, like, I feel like I think maybe it's also because it's a little bit more shifted with the fact that women's wrestling is taken more seriously now. Maybe that kind of commentary isn't as much, because I remember even, on like SmackDown, Taz kind of trying to fill in that role a little bit as well.
Yeah, talking about tomatoes. How it is or
whatever it was. But especially considering this is also when you have people like Victoria and Beth Phoenix in this match, solid wrestlers.
Yeah, there was some good folks there. Michelle McCool was a part of this match and really kind of took over and looked pretty badass. I'm assuming at this point she's now probably Miss Undertaker in 2007 or on her way to becoming it, because she looked great in the match. I thought she was looked like a real dominant force.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, rewatching it, there's a lot more. I feel like I appreciate that match more now than I did 15 years ago.
If you had told me, my life depended on naming the person that they'd be challenging for the women's title, I could have went through 50 names before I finally got Candice Michelle. I did not remember her too much at all, and the idea that she was the champion that they were chasing was definitely interesting.
I'm pretty sure I only remember her because she was one of the ones that was in Playboy.
She was, and she was also she had a thing on the Super Bowl every year before she went to WWE. That's how she became sort of popular. I don't remember, but the next up though on the show is the Matt Hardy and MVP segment. They had set this up earlier in the day when Vince McMahon was talking with MVP, and MVP was saying that he'd actually be honored to be Vince's son. Really what had occurred was MVP, due to the wellness policy, they had actually noticed that he had a heart condition where he had a rapid heartbeat. So they took him out of the ring for a while to get that situated, which is why instead of doing matches, him and Matt Hardy were doing all these things to try to one-up one another, and really had such a fun rivalry between the two of them. One of my favorite rivalries between the two of Matt Hardy's career. As I've said, Matt Hardy's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And I think the two of them really could have done great. I really enjoyed everything they did.
Yeah, except for I feel like this segment went on a little bit too long. Like the lead up to it was just a little bit too long.
It's one of these things where I did not expect that that's where it was going. I guess I just didn't think that Austin was a thing. And I mean, the big thing here, eventually, MVP challenges Matt Hardy to a beer drinking contest. Doing the research now and realizing that Austin was in town to do something for this show makes it a lot more sense that Austin would show up. But at the time, rewatching this, I'm like, where is this going? I don't remember. I don't think Austin's a part of this show. But he was, and he shows up, and it was, his part was, probably the shortest, sweetest part of the whole thing. He just comes in there, gives him they do the beer cheers, and he knocks out MVP, hits him with the stunner, and away we go. I was almost getting ready and excited to hear some of Austin's promo. We never got that here.
No, and that's I feel like the MVP. So MVP comes out, he talks for what feels like forever.
Forever, yeah.
And then Hardy comes out, and then he teases it a little bit too far, where the crowd starts to get the idea. And then he draws it out even more. Right. And it's dude, the second that you said, I'm naming a replacement, Austin's music should have hit. That's it.
Yeah,
it feels like the next. It's like it probably wasn't that long, but it felt like it dragged it out so much longer than it needed to be.
100. Yeah, I mean, it really was one of these deals where I think Matt should have just came out and said, "Unfortunately, I have acid indigestion and can't
Yep.
compete, but I have a suitable replacement." And then Austin's music hits, or they have the little challenge and he loses and then brings in Austin to face MVP after or something like that.
Right. Or what would have been even better was if MVP brings like a replacement, but like not a great replacement, and then Matt says, "Well, funny enough, I have my own replacement," and then Stone
Right.
Cold
Well, I
comes
mean,
in.
like, so Sandman's on the roster at the
Yeah,
time.
there you
So
go.
that could have been,
Would have
could
been.
have,
I actually that would have been so much better if it was a Sandman versus Stone Cold legitimate drinking contest, like
yeah,
not what they had. If like
a
that would
dream,
that
a
would have been
dream
perfect.
match in any city for sure.
Yeah, would have been perfect.
But yeah, so I thought that was cool. The idea of Austin showing up really got me. I was surprised there. From there, I believe we go into is it Batista and Great Khali, or is it
There's
Triple H
one
and
more before that.
Triple H and Booker T? Oh,
Oh, there's two more before that, I guess then.
CM Punk and John Morrison.
Yep.
And I wasn't feeling that. I didn't enjoy this match as much as I thought. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I remember they eventually have a match on ECW TV that I remember watching at your place, and
Yeah.
Punk won the title, and that was very good. But this one just felt like I think John Morrison still wasn't fully comfortable. I mean, being the guy to replace Chris Benoit, can you really blame him?
Yeah.
But it was I think they were still finding their footing, and I think that their rivalry being tied to Benoit for so long, because this is now in the end of August 25th, and they are still going off of a rivalry that started back at Vengeance and June 24th. So probably just a
Yeah.
little too long here in the tooth.
Also, something that I forgot to mention at the beginning was how confused I was that there were three different announcer tables.
Yes, far too,
Until
far
I
too
was like,
much.
oh right, ECW was a thing
Right.
with them.
The awful WWE ECW
Yeah.
revival. And I feel like at this point, I totally forgot that Punk was still in ECW for well after a year since his launch at this point.
Yeah.
So I was very surprised to still see him over there.
Yeah. But I was like,
Um,
I think the worst part about this was that I feel like Morrison should have he should have won clean.
yeah, because he did something. Yeah, because especially because they're trying to establish his character as a big deal
Yeah.
and as a real champion here. So I agree. He should have gotten a couple of clean wins, and he does not do that.
Not for any other reason than he misses the rope the first couple of times he tries for it.
Yeah. I was surprised that Peacock still had that. You'd think they'd make that a little smoother. But I could imagine 2007, definitely Matt and myself were probably, you effed up, you effed up, you
Yeah.
effed up the second it took place, which is a not nice independent wrestling chant that we got way too much excitement over doing it. If anyone screwed up, I definitely know I did. I don't know about you, but I used to jump up to my feet and scream "you effed up" the second that got random ticket seller who has no experience after he messed up.
You would also do it in like normal everyday life. So.
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, to this day, if we're driving around our area and there's a parking space that's never there, and if the very rare time there's a parking space in front of our house, we get a big holy shit, holy shit. So still use wrestling chants to this day.
Yeah.
Next,
It's awesome.
oh yeah, exactly. This is awesome's a good one. Yeah, my personal favorite was when we'd go to the independent wrestling shows and they'd go on so long that the crowd would start chanting "We see daylight."
Yeah.
It's a great one.
Like that actually happened once.
Oh yeah, for sure, without question. Next up on the show here is, I think, the correct me if I'm wrong, the return of Triple H to take on King Booker, and this is where Matt, I think, really he did his best to derail Triple H's return because he was cheering for Booker so much and was so invested. I have no problem with it. At the end of the day, if you're cheering and you're really invested in your person, while I probably prefer the old traditional root for the babyface, boo the heels, if at the end of the day you're invested in the person, I think it's great. It's just like clearly Triple H was not going to come back here and lose to Booker T. So you were just setting yourself up for disappointment.
I also feel like there are some where it's like, you could root for guys that are like, I want to put this nicely, better wrestlers than Booker T.
Right.
To say that's my guy. Like,
yeah. Well, and I think
that was
his
guy. Like, that was his, like.
I think also it's like you couldn't turn around and say, oh man, they're really holding Booker back. He was given a world title as King Booker, so they weren't holding Booker back. And I think that they had screwed him in WrestleMania 19, but this was now several years later, and King Booker was one of the more featured acts in WWE. So Triple H gets the win. I will say, after the match, the standing ovation, the over-the-topness, even from the announcers, when the match itself was basically a squash, Triple H beat him pretty handily.
Yeah.
I thought that was a little over the top, and you could almost see the scowl in JR's face as he clearly is being told, "Go here, stand up, show him respect."
Yeah, put him over.
Yeah. So, but I thought, I thought it was cool to see that return. Another match I think that, being there live or we may have skipped was, I don't think we skipped it. And the reason I don't think we skipped it was I know it was Great Khali against Batista.
Match of the night. 5 stars.
Well, I will say, I did not appreciate Batista as much as I should have when I was actually watching and while he was around. Later on in life, I did. So when I was at WrestleMania 35, I remember doing the whole and getting the whole thing down and everything and being like, this guy's awesome. 2007, I absolutely hated Batista. He was the guy I couldn't stand. Anytime from 2005 through his entire run, I couldn't stand him.
But I think that was also one of those, like, I hate him as a person off screen type of things where, 100%. He had some personal stuff going on that we weren't fans of. So that had a part of it.
Right. The rumor was that while Batista's wife was dealing with cancer, he had cheated on her with Melina and was in a relationship with Melina while she was in a relationship with John Morrison. And I was just like, screw this guy. Like, screw him. And so I do remember Binder, Matt, whatever. You guys can look him up on Twitter. He doesn't need the plug. But the it went through and he was cheering loudly for Khali, and it was let's go Khali, and the guy behind us let out a big, oh God, now it's let's go Khali. God, there's always an asshole, and I've stolen that there's always an asshole line forever since then. I'll never forget there's always an asshole, and I think he was, I think that point he had gotten way too much with the stuff, and I think we at that point were like, enough, because people were getting pissed around us. And
I was getting pissed.
Yeah, it was like, enough of this. If we're not into Batista, fine, but you can't just sit there and let's go Khali just to piss off the whole area around us.
Right.
Matt, rooting for the Great Khali aside, what were your thoughts here of the Great Khali and I guess of this match with Batista?
So I knew going in that it was not going to be good. I knew going in that Batista was going to have to try and carry this match somehow. But the thing is that because he is so stiff and because he just doesn't do anything really, like I remember there's a moment where Khali has him like on his knees basically, and he's got his hands on his shoulders, like he's supposed to be doing some amazing horrible submission hold, and it's just like he's giving him a back massage, like
right.
Like, why is this and to their credit, I think this was the SmackDown match, right?
Yeah.
So the announcers on this were Cole and JBL.
JBL, yes, because JBL had moved over to commentary at this point.
Right. They're selling the heck out of this, trying to sell how big of a monster the Khali is, and how ruthless he is, and how dangerous he is, and all this. And there was something about where JBL was like, I'm not going to mince words. He's awful. He's an ugly son of a gun, and goes off on this thing. And it's just like, yeah, we know
Right.
he shouldn't be in this match. Like that, or if anything, this could have been the opener match, or this could have been like, I mean, I get why it definitely like it was kind of a roller coaster thing where like Triple H, like his return was huge. Yeah, that match was a squash, but that moment was big.
Right.
So they needed something to kind of be in between that and the main event.
Makes sense. That does make a lot of sense.
But this just, I feel like it sucked all of the energy out of everything, especially with the ending where Kali gets DQ'd.
Right. Yeah. And I, you know, and I remember that when Kali did get DQ'd, Matt was just to the moon because Batista didn't get the title back. But it's almost like at that point, it isn't even fun. You don't want this guy as the champion, even if you're rooting for all the heels, because he's just killing the show. He's literally the world champion of the SmackDown brand at this time. Like, and it feels like a similar situation where, like, so Brock Lesnar's back in WWE now. He's fighting Roman Reigns this year at SummerSlam. And they're going back to that well because everybody has gotten injured. And it feels like back in 2007, and the difference being, of course, so basically they're going back to that well because they know Brock Lesnar at least is a household name. You know, they'll sell pay-per-views. Back in 2007, it felt like if all else failed, they went back to the Great Khali simply because he was just this larger-than-life big person. But the problem is, he was just not good. And I feel like for me, that was something I did not watch SmackDown at that time. And I think it was because I'd watched the pay-per-views, I watched all the Raws, and I'd check in on SmackDown once in a while. But I know for me, it was like, how do you watch something where you have the Great Khali in there with Batista? I mean, just not good. And Khali main events an additional SummerSlam. Well, not main events, but he's in another SummerSlam as the world champion. Like, they went with him for way too long into these situations.
I mean, any amount of time was too long. Like, you know, once you realize, like, once you saw him once, and like, yeah, it's still like, you know, Batista is a huge dude.
Yeah.
And he is like, he's tiny compared to Great Khali. Like anybody aside from like maybe the Big Show.
Right.
Or I'm blanking on the guy's name now that showed up in AEW. I don't remember what his name is either. Yeah. But like he's also a big guy. But both of those at least they're capable wrestlers. I haven't seen too much of the AEW guy, but from what little I've seen, he's actually a decent wrestler. Right. Like, you know, all big guys are going to be a little bit slow. They're going to be a little bit clunky, but like Khali is just like he just stands there and he just like all he can do is stomp around.
Yeah. No, I mean it was just not good, and for me this definitely was the low light of the event, and I was ready to get to the main event, which was John Cena versus Randy Orton. And when you hear I don't know about you, but when I hear John Cena versus Randy Orton, I immediately go, oh my God, John Cena versus Randy Orton, because they've fought at main evented some odd 20 pay-per-views. But at this stage, back in SummerSlam 2007, this was the very first one-on-one pay-per-view meeting between the two. They had a couple of pay-per-view matches prior. Backlash 2007, a fatal four-way, including Edge and Shawn Michaels. And then the fatal five-way at Vengeance, including Bobby Lashley, Mick Foley, and I guess it was King Booker. So now, having a one-on-one match for the first time, this felt like a massive thing.
Yeah. But also at the same time, again, like rooting for Randy Orton here. Like Randy Orton is probably also like I wouldn't say necessarily top 5, but top 10 of my least favorite wrestlers, just because it's that outside thing where like he just looks like a dick.
Mm-hmm.
Like he looks like he does his character. And also there was the thing with like him and Foley and like being a mark. Like I'm always going to side with Foley.
Yeah.
So him like, and going back and like reading Mick's book where he talks about that storyline.
Yeah.
How he wants Orton to put Orton over and all that stuff. Like it's great, but I'm still going to side with Foley. Ergo, I'm going to side against Orton.
Right.
And like Evolution was not my thing either, you know.
Yeah. They were basically running roughshod over everything. Yeah. For so long. So I completely agree. And obviously, but at the same time, I think at this point, we are so well past. Cena's had the title for a very long period of time, to the point that, one of the things that I think was keeping us very invested as fans of WWE. I don't know if it had started just yet, but was going to start. If not, it would have started a little while later. Was the Save Us.Y2J vignettes that were starting up. And Jericho made it very clear, the whole point there was Jericho was supposed to be coming in to save the WWE and the WWE universe, the fans, of John Cena's long, lengthy title reign. And unfortunately, Cena got hurt and he lost the belt to Orton. So I feel like that kind of took a lot of steam out of Jericho's return. But that was something that I think everyone at this point was just ready to move on, and the crowd was ready for Orton to get the title. And apparently the story goes he was supposed to, and then they changed things to send the crowd home happy, quote unquote, and give Cena the title.
Sending me home happy would have been Orton getting the title. So
I don't know what they were thinking here. That was certainly the right call. All 4 champions on this show retained their titles. So I think that would have been certainly something to send everyone home like, hey, you've witnessed something great, a title change here. It was a really good match. On rewatch, I thought it was way better than I remember it, because I remember the sting from it and the bad taste in my mouth from leaving the show after Cena is basically destroyed by Orton for about 90 minutes, almost the entire time of this match, and then hits. I think Orton hits the RKO, gets a 2 count. Cena pops up, hits the AA, and good night at the FU. We're going home and it's over.
Yeah.
And it's like out of nowhere, he just immediately just pops back up, hits his finisher, and that's it. And it was just wind out of the sails, and one of the most disappointing endings to a show, certainly at that time period. And it was growing very tired with John Cena always winning.
And see, when I rewatched this, I had a very different opinion of this match. My opinions of the wrestlers themselves aside, I was not super impressed with this one. It was a little bit too much like submissions and like jockeying and stuff, and like these guys are not submission
That's a good point.
wrestlers. Like, if it's like I don't know, like Bret Hart match, like you expect Bret Hart to be a submission guy. You expect that. You expect certain guys to be like this was with John Cena bringing in the STFU as his like submission move. Was like when The Rock brought in the sharpshooter for his submission move.
Right.
Like, it's like that's not your move. Like, we get it. You're trying new things, and like maybe it's like you want to add a submission, because I think like both of them at some point were like in a submission only match, and it was like a way to incorporate into their kind of wheelhouse. But you're not that guy.
No, definitely not. I completely agree. And it's interesting because I remember we left that bill, and I think that was one of the times where I was like, wow, that's when we need a little break. You feel, I definitely did. I felt wrestled out from all the hype. And then you get there and the show ends on such a sour note. I think that for me, I know like we had the plan, maybe if the show was good, we'd go to Boston the next day. We did not. And things did slow down a little, I think, as a fan. While it felt like WWE was on the recovery from all of the Benoit stuff with this show and maybe back trying to rebuild their image, unfortunately, things would go from, bad and continue to be bad for a bit, because 4 days after this show, the signature pharmacy scandal rocks WWE. Do you remember this at all?
So I remember when it happened.
Yeah. And this is really, at this point, this is about as bad as it gets for WWE, because so many big names were involved in this here, and there are so many suspensions that come from it. So the big names that came out of this were Charlie Haas, Edge, Funaki, and there was a little rumor about Funaki where it's like, Funaki wasn't really wrestling too much at the time. Funaki wasn't necessarily he wasn't looking necessarily cut up. So Part of it's like, was Funaki maybe ordering something for someone else? Who knows? Gregory Helms, John Morrison, Randy Orton, Umaga, William Regal. Those were the names that out at Mr. Kennedy, which I'll get to in a second, and Chavo Guerrero. So there was first off, the two names that really jumped out, William Regal and Chavo Guerrero. William Regal, because he had done so much to be highly publicized in terms of getting better. So to hear that he was still having his issues was very sad, I remember at the time. And then Chavo Guerrero, it's like you think, knowing everything that happened with Eddie, that you would have stopped doing this type of stuff.
Yeah.
So that one was really kind of disheartening. All of these individuals did get suspended, except for one. Do you know the one person on that list who did not get suspended?
Was it Edge?
It was Randy Orton.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course.
Reason being, no one has the reason for this. And the thought is maybe he had gotten suspended earlier and then came clean about this particular deal. So maybe that's why they had the loophole. But when he got suspended again in 2012 and was gone for 60 days, people thought because of this that he was going to be gone forever. There were a couple other names that were tied to this. Santino Marella, Simon Dean, who was actually terminated because at this time he had moved over to becoming part of the office, so he was let go. Chris Masters, Booker T, who was suspended and then left the company, so he's gone right after that. And then Batista's name was kind of thrown around, but it was never proven, and he was adamantly against that he had anything to do with this and was not suspended. So, I mean, pretty much half the damn roster at this point is rocked in this scandal, and it is not a good look for WWE. And the number one person that always comes to mind here is Kennedy, because Kennedy was so adamantly, when the whole Benoit thing happened, Kennedy was one of these deals where he came out very much in defense of WWE. He put it on his website. He went out and volunteered to do all these different shows, talked about how WWE had saved his life, how he was clean because of WWE. He wasn't doing steroids because of the wellness policy. And then lo and behold, this comes out that he is like the guy who's doing so much of this stuff and getting so much and was such a big part of the Signature Pharmacy scandal, so much so that that is the reason why he was taken out of the Vince McMahon storyline of being his son and replaced by Hornswoggle, and never really recovered from that, which is a shame, because I think they had high plans for him, and I think his career would have gone a lot better had that not happened.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure that scandal ruined a lot of those guys' careers. Only a small handful of them ever recovered. But on the other hand, like, depending on what it was, you run the risk always. Whether it's your personal or professional life, like, doing that kind of stuff always comes with risks.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff was, steroids, illegal prescription pills, a lot of different things there. But it was one of these deals where it was like suddenly all these people are gone. Umaga, who we were just talking about, really kind of on the rise at this point. He loses the Intercontinental title right after this because they need to get the title off him as quick as possible. And just a really, really difficult time. That's because you remember also Undertaker, he's injured at the time.
Yeah.
Shawn Michaels is injured at the time. So they end up bringing back Taker at Unforgiven, actually, just a couple weeks later. But it was a very strange time period to be a fan, especially when so many of the people that you're used to seeing on a usual basis are just not weren't part of the show for a while.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, it would have been a great opportunity for a lot of those other guys to get some sort of push. Like you're talking, like we were talking, like Paul London, Brian Kendrick, like, I love those guys.
Yeah, me too.
I think, again, like, this was, I think, something either I had brought up or I was going to bring up with you, maybe now or later or something. But I think one of the things why WWE struggled during this point is that they were not willing to give cruiserweights and that kind of wrestling, like, format any sort of chance.
You're right.
Because you watch, like, I would say, one of the top matches of the night, honestly, was Rey Mysterio against Chavo. We didn't really think too highly of it, but looking back, it was a really good match. And, storyline, all that stuff, that added a lot to it maybe. But as far as actual in-ring wrestling, it was I would say top 3.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I think that match was, as far as in-ring goes, and I make the, I say what I say about Chavo Guerrero, maybe not being a fan, but certainly I think leaps and bounds better than any of the other action that was there. And those guys are the only guys really who have that style of wrestling, the high flying style, the style that gets people excited on the whole card.
Well, and to kind of extend that also, that's also probably why it took so long for the women's division to take off. Because when you watch women's wrestling now, it is a lot of that high flying, like lucha style wrestling. It's not the kind of like wrestling that you would see in a John Cena versus Randy Orton match.
Right.
But they tried to train them to do it that way. And when you have a women's match, like it's not going to translate the same way. They tried to make it work, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it took so long, is because they were trying to train women to do the kinds of things that, not that they can't do, but that from an audience perspective doesn't look as good as when you say, all right, maybe let's try more of like reversal type stuff, like let's do more like Hurricane Ranas and flips and stuff. Not necessarily from the top rope. It doesn't have to be that wild. Just some more like actual wrestling.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I think thankfully, it wouldn't be too long before WWE finally started to realize they needed to get away from the standard old fashioned of everybody needs to look like Randy Orton. You need to have guys who are over 6 feet tall and 250 pounds of shredded muscle or an absolute monster. When you start to see guys like CM Punk become a bigger deal in the company, the rise of Daniel Bryan and all of those guys here as they start to the turn of the century, I guess, over in 2010. So, I did enjoy this look back here, really of our entire summer here of 2007. We split up a variety of the pieces here, and then gave you the full thing. So if you want to just take this and listen to the whole bang, you can. But what would you say, in looking back, if you had a closing thought or two, and wanted a lasting memory of all of this that we talked about?
I would say I think it was almost like a reverse nostalgia factor, where usually you go back and say, I want to watch an old TV show from when I was growing up in the 90s or 2000s. I want to go back and rewatch it. And you go back and rewatch it, and you're like, this was horrible. Why did I like this when it came out?
Right.
And this one was going back where it's like, it was almost like maybe because of everything else that was going on at the time.
Right.
Where now we're the removal of all of the actual emotion and everything around it made it so that we can watch this kind of in a little bubble and make it so that rewatching it now actually a little bit better.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, certainly a better taste in my mouth watching it on rewatch as opposed to watching it way back, from a live perspective in 2007. For me, I'd say the idea here is this type of show is the reason why, to this day, I always try to do more than the show itself. Because as I look back at some of this, I remember the Ring of Honor show. I remember meeting The Miz and MVP and gang at the karaoke type deal. I remember us going and doing all the fun SummerSlam hype things at Warped Tour and at Ozfest. And those memories really kind of shine a decent light on what was a pretty mediocre SummerSlam pay-per-view for us.
Yeah, and it's more of like the memories of everything else that we did surrounding it better more than the event itself.
Absolutely. Well, that is going to do it and wrap us up here, Steve. Thanks so much for talking with us here about all that was in the very depressing summer of 2007 in World Wrestling Entertainment. The good news is that there is a lot of fun here coming up for us here on the channel. We'll continue to check in with you, and before long, we'll be back to do our recap and our rewatch of, not a rewatch, but our retrospective of the Royal Rumble 2008, a much better show. You start to see Jeff Hardy enter the main event scene, and one of in my opinion, the most fun returns as John Cena returns at number 30. A moment that I think both of us remember quite differently, but we were both there, not together, but both there live at the show. And once we get into Royal Rumble season, we'll go back and look at that. But until then, let us know what your memories of this show are. Are you guys on our side that this is maybe a lackluster show? Maybe looking back, it's better than you thought. Let us know in the comment section below. Make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe. And I'll be back with you guys real soon here on Watch Along Wrestling.